This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good Erev Shabbos, Rabbi Glatstein. As we prepare for Parshas Sisa, Habaleno Toiva, Parshas Para, Res Hashem soon Chodesh Nisan. We want to welcome all of our Torah Anytime viewers. We want to welcome all our listeners on J-Root Radio, and I guess anyone else who's listening. The walls have ears, and of course all of our very esteemed live listeners here in the Young Israel of Kugan Hills in New York City. Okay, so Parshas Sisa. On Wednesday we discussed the topic of who did the avodah before the Chet HaEgel. We mentioned that today, that certainly after the Chet HaEgel, the avodah is administered by the Kohanim, and the Levim also have a role. They assist, they sing Shira. And yet we know that before the Chet HaEgel, the Bechayros were the ones entrusted with some degree of avodah. And what we discussed Wednesday is which avodah were they going to do the avodah in the Mishkan? Was it only that they had the role of the Levim? So I want to continue that discussion and speak about a different aspect of it, more of a hashkafic aspect of what the Torah is trying to teach us. Rashi in Parshas Bamidbar, Parag Gimel, Pasuk Yud Beis, number 1 on your sheets. If anybody wants to get the source sheets for any Shiurim, you could email Rabbi Glatstein source sheets at gmail.com. Okay, so the Rashi says like this: Lafisha haisa ha'avoda b'bechayros. The avodah used to be administered by the bechayros. Ukshachatu be'egel, and when Klal Yisrael sinned at the egel, nifsalu, the bechayros were disqualified. V'halavim shaloi avdu avodah zara. Nivcharu tachteim, and the Levium who did not worship idols, they were chosen in their stead. In fact, the Mishnah says in Masechta Zvachim, I believe on that Kuf Yud Beis, the Mishnah says like this: that before the Chet, until the Mishkan was put up, the avodah, the habamos mutaros, they were allowed to bring karbanos on the bamos, and the avodah was done by the bechayros. But once the Mishkan was put up, the bamos became aser, and the avodah was done by the kohanim. So we see that before the Chet HaEgel, the bechayros were gods, and they were the ones who did the avodah. So here's the $1 million question. The question is, Parshas Boy, yeah, Rabbi Glatstein, was it before the Chet HaEgel or after the Chet HaEgel? No. Parshas Boy is, of course, before the Chet HaEgel. Parshas Boy, they didn't even leave Mitzrayim yet. You know, they may have made an Egel, but they had to leave Mitzrayim before they made Egel. Now we discussed, as Machlokes Rashi and the Ramban, whether Parshas Truma Tetzaveh were in fact before the Chet HaEgel or not. The Ramban learns that Yesh Seder Lemikra, that the Parshas are written Kesidron. Truma first came the command to build the Mishkan and the Big Day Kahuna. That was followed by the Chet HaEgel. We asked, one of the questions we asked on Wednesday was that if the Chet HaEgel hadn't happened yet, who in the world were they making Big Day Kahuna for? The Kohanim weren't selected yet. And this is before the Chet HaEgel. We mentioned that Rashi Shita is Ein Mukdama Mulchar B'Torah. Rashi Shita is, even though Truma and Tetzaveh were written before Sisa, they actually occurred after Sisa. First came the Chet HaEgel, and then came the command to build the Mishkan. But certainly Parshas Boy came before the Chet HaEgel. That being the case, at the end of Parshas Boy, Parak Yud Gimel, Pasuk Yud Gimel, V'chol Peter Chamar Tifta V'seh, and every firstborn donkey you should redeem with a sheep. V'yimloi Sifteh, and if you don't redeem it, V'araftoi, you chop off its neck. V'chol B'char Adam B'vanecha Tifta, and every firstborn man among your children you should redeem. So, I don't know if you ever thought about this, but why in the world are you redeeming your firstborn male? Why would you redeem a Bechar? This is before the Chet HaEgel. The only reason to redeem a Bechar is the Becharim were disqualified and they're no longer the servants of God. But before the Chet HaEgel, why would you redeem the Bechar? After the Chet HaEgel, I get it. The Becharos used to belong to God, and they've been exchanged in place for the Levium. But before the Chet HaEgel, why do you need to redeem them? The kid belongs to God still. He's still the one doing the Avodah. So that's the question I saw in the Sefer Imek Bracha, or Baruch Weiss. He says, "V'nei b'soif parshas Boy ksiv b'chol b'char adam b'vanech tiv d'char tzarchiyon." The parsha zu nemra b'zman Yitzias Mitzrayim. When the avodah was still in the hands of the B'chayrim, that's also an interesting question. Maybe someone out there knows. Is it b'chayros or b'chayrim? Rashi says b'chayros. Sometimes we say b'chayrim. It's interesting. Makas b'chayros, tainas b'chayrim. I don't know. When it's a bad thing, I don't know why all of a sudden it becomes lashon nekeva. But that's when is it nekeva? When is it zachar? That's a different topic. Kaidem shechatu be'egel, before they sin at the egel. V'imkein lama tzrichim liftoisasam. Why in the world would you have to redeem a bachar? He doesn't need to be redeemed yet. He's still kadosh. He still belongs to God.
Well, what kind of avoda was it before the Mishkan? I mean, you had this.
I was here Wednesday.
Excuse me.
Yeah. And those of us who were, they know the answer to that question. Okay, so that's the question. Why would you need to redeem the b'chayros before the cheder egel? So interestingly, the Rashbam and the Chizkuni, the Rishonim, they deal with this question, and they both say something very unusual. They say that the command to redeem the b'chayros was al shem ha'asad. It was for the future. But at the time, there was no need for the b'chayros to be redeemed. The Rashbam says, Tifteh li'achar sheneskadshu haLevim, after the Levium were sanctified, tachas kol b'char, in place of the b'char. And that happened when? In year 2, when the Mishkan was put up. V'lakachta chamisha shkalim lagogos, you take 5 per head. Ufeduyim and chayish tifteh be'arkacha. In other words, says Rashbam, when they left Mitzrayim, firstborn did not have to be redeemed. They were not redeemed. The only concept of redeeming the firstborn came into effect after the Levium were chosen. Before the Levium were chosen, the Mecharim did the Avodah. What do they have to redeem them for? They're kadosh still. Chizkuni says the same thing. Says the Chizkuni, mitzvah zu lo'inoaga ad la'achar sheneskadshu haLevim. This minhag did not take place. This mitzvah did not take place until after the Levium were sanctified in the 2nd year. Very interesting that the Torah would write a mitzvah that wasn't relevant, because look, if everyone did, but it's more than that. Think about it. If the B'charim would have done what they needed to do, not only was it not relevant yet, it would never have been relevant. So God's giving a mitzvah for the future. Hey God, well, they don't have a fighting chance. Maybe they won't sin. But God wrote a mitzvah in the Torah predicated on the fact that in the future the B'charim would sin. Did the B'charim have free choice? I mean, here God is writing in the Torah that you need to redeem the B'charim. But right now they don't need to be redeemed. Yeah, the time will come, you'll need to redeem them. Well, why? Maybe they'll be good. Have some faith. But yet, the Rishonim say this mitzvah is given al shem ha'asad. Do we have any other mitzvah like that? That God's saying, I'm giving you a mitzvah, and it's dependent on a certain event that will happen. Interesting. Now, the Sforno is not so drastic here. The Sforno in, I believe it's Parshas Behaloischa, the Sforno says that even though the B'chayrim were sanctified when they left Mitzrayim, and they still had the ability to do the Avodah, and therefore their Kedusha was still intact. But the Sforno says something very interesting. Look at number 6. The Sforno says, Amnam b'makas b'chayros shahayu ha'b'chayros ruyim le'anosh ba'avoin hadar. At the Makkah, the firstborn, when God was punishing the Egyptians, really the b'chayros of Klal Yisrael should have taken it on the chin for the rest of the Jewish people, because there's a concept in Nei Hayoisem Hayoiser Nechbadim, because they are the most honorable of Klal Yisrael. Uviyoisem Bilti Ruyim Li'natzim Imakas Medina, and really they were not fit to be saved from a nationwide, a countrywide Makkah. Inyan Penti Safa Ba'avay Noyer. So the Sforno is saying the following concept, that sometimes, even if somebody doesn't deserve to be punished, but if there is a punishment to the country in general, a person could sort of get punished along with everyone else. Now, Hashem wasn't going to destroy all of Klal Yisrael, but because the B'chayros were the most worthy, and they were the representatives and the most honorable of Klal Yisrael, really they should have been the ones to incur punishment and suffer punishment on behalf of Klal Yisrael, since all the other mitzvahs were being wiped out. But I saved them, I saved them because they were holy to me. How did I save them? God said like this: really, you b'chayrim should be wiped out. The fact that you're not wiped out, I'm saving you. How am I saving you? Instead of wiping you out, I'm taking you to be mine, that I own you. So now God owns the b'chayrim. To do what? In what way does God own the b'chayrim? Says the Sforno, God owns the b'chayrim, that the b'chayrim are His. They cannot do anything chulin. So then it would come out that a kohen would not be able to go to the store, or go for a walk, or go on a trip for himself, because he's owned by God. So technically speaking, says the Sforno, a firstborn is owned by God, that he cannot be involved in anything profane. Just like any holy thing, you can't use a pair of tefillin for something mundane. So technically speaking, a bechar would not be able to do anything during the course of his lifetime mundane. So in order to sort of free the bechar from being kadosh, that he cannot do anything chulin at all, he needs pidyon. You hear what this Sforno is saying? He's trying to get out of our question. Our question is, what do you need to redeem a bechar for? You only need to redeem a bechar after the chedo egel, when the bechar is not doing the avodah. Before the chedo egel, the bechar is owned by God and is holy. So what are you redeeming him for? So the Sforno says you still got to redeem the bechar, because if you don't redeem him, he'll be entirely owned by God. He's the davar kadosh. The way God saved the becharim is, I'm saving you, but I'm owning you now. So now you're like a kli shares, and you should only be allowed to do divrei chulin. The only reason I allow you to do the mundane is if you're redeemed. Like anything which is holy requires pidyon, and when it has pidyon, it's yotzi l'chulin. This is the meaning of the pasuk at the end of Shemais, B'chal b'char adam b'vanecha tifta. Now, says the Chida, the pidyon is not going to get the bechor off the hook that he doesn't do the avodah. Before the chedo egel, even though he's redeemed, he still does do the avodah. The redemption only frees him from being entirely owned by God, that he can't be involved in chulin. But he would still have done the avodah, and now, after the chedo egel, the bechorim have been sort of despised, and the Leviim taken in their place, to do the avodah. But the purpose of redeeming the firstborn before the chedo egel, again, was not to get them out of the avodah, was to allow them to do chulin. Okay, that's how the Sforno gets out of our question. Again, the question is, why would God say to redeem a firstborn? You don't redeem him before the chedo egel. So the Rashbam in the Chizkuni says the command is for the future. The Sforno learns it's right now.
How could the Leviim right now do
today?
Chulin? How could they? If they substituted if they replaced the B'charim, so how could they do Chulin?
So again, the according to the Sforno, the B'charim still need redemption today to get them out of, to allow them to do Chulin. Now, okay. Yeah.
The pasuk before B'chol B'chor says, "V'hoyoki v'yachu Hashem el eretz haknani Hashem nishba l'chol chavasechon tzonaloch." That's the pasuk.
So you're saying that indicates that it's Hashem ha'asid?
Yeah. Pasuk Yirah.
Okay, that because there it's talking about the firstborn of the animals. Firstborn of the animals, you may need.
But it goes on to talk about the Bechor also.
Yeah, but the simple meaning is that it's going on the karbanos that are only brought in the Beis Hamikdash. Yeah, but that would fit in according to the Rashbam and the Chizkuni that it's Al Shem HaAsid. Yeah, but simply put, you would think they did the Pidyon HaBen in the Midbar according to the Rashbam and the Chizkuni. They did not. According to the Sforno, they did. Let's go back. According to the approach of the Rashbam and the Chizkuni, the Chida has something very interesting to say about this. Again, just think very carefully what this means. God is saying that you, firstborn, even though right now you're Kadosh and you don't need Pinyan, I know the day will come that you'll need redemption. Why will the day come you need redemption? Because I know that you will sin, and therefore I'm giving you a mitzvah now, before you sin, that since one day you will sin, you will need to be redeemed. Well, wait a second, God. Are you mandating then that these people are going to sin? So the Chidah and the Nachal Kidumim says, Perush Rashbam, Tifta, La'achar Sheneskat Shalavim, Tachas Kol B'char, B'shan Hashin Shugam Mishkan, and the Chizkuni also says, V'hu Davar Mukhrach. That you have to say this. But wait a second. They will only need to be redeemed from the Chedo Egal. So is God not then interfering with their free will? So we all know that one of the great mysteries of life is how even though God knows what we will do, He doesn't make us do it. Right? Hakol tsafoy v'harashus nitna. Everything is foreseen, and yet free choice is given. Hakol tsafoy v'harashus nitna. Everything is foreseen, and yet permission is given to do what we want.
He knows what your choice will be.
In fact, right, like the Rambam says, look in the Rambam Hilchos Shuvah Perkei Halacha. The Rambam says, Shema Toimar, B'haloi HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yoidea Kol Ma Sheyeh. God knows what will be. V'kaidem Sheyeh Yada, and before it is, He knows. Shezeh Yeh Tzadik Oy Rasha Oy Lo Yada. Or maybe He doesn't know. Im Yada Shu Yeh Tzadik. If God knows He'll be righteous, Yeh Shel Yeh Tzadik, then He has to be righteous. V'im Toimar Sheyeda Sheyeh Tzadik, ve'evshir Sheyeh Rasha. If you say He knows He'll be a Tzadik, but He could still be a Rasha, Arei Lo Yada Adavar. Albar, then He doesn't know it. In other words, does God know? Does God not know? If He knows, then we have to be what He knows. And if He doesn't know, then what God doesn't know? So the Rambam says the answer to this question is da shahatshuva shelazu aruka me'eretz mida urachava minayam. The answer to this question is longer than the earth and wider than the sea. I happen to know shiurim that are even longer than that, but the Rambam says that the answer to this question is longer than the earth and wider than the sea. There are many great principles. V'harorim ramim, and high mountains, sulyim are dependent on it. You need to know, but you need to know and understand this matter. I already explained in the second parak of Hilchos Yisodei Torah, Kadosh Baruch Hu Eina Yoidea Midea Shehi Chutz Mimeno. God's knowledge is not external to Him. Kivnei Adam Shem V'Daitam Shnayim, like man, that their essence and their knowledge are two different things. You see, by a human being, there is a human being, and then there's their knowledge. Their knowledge is not their essence. Their knowledge is something that they happen to know. But Elahu Yisala Shemoy V'Daitai Echad. God and His das are one. V'ein Daitai Shel Adam Yichol Hasik Davar Zeh Al Boriyai. Man cannot comprehend this clearly. Ukshem She'in Koyach Ba'Adam Lahasik V'Limtzai Amitas Abarai. The same way, man can never fully comprehend the reality and the essence of God. Shneimar Ki Lo Yorani Ha'Adam V'Chai. See, nobody knows what this pasuk means. If I would say, what does it mean, Ki Lo Yorani Ha'Adam V'Chai? You can't know God and you can't see God and live. Most people think it means, yeah, if I can't look at God, a human being will not be able to live and look at God. That's not what it means. That's not what it means. Yeah, but I always thought that. Okay, so hopefully now you know what it means. But it has nothing to do with you can't see God. No kidding. When Moshe Rabbeinu says, Hareini nas k'vaydecha, I want to see you, and God says, Ki lo yorani adam achai, by the way, it's in this week's Parsha, it does not mean you can't see God. Of course you can't see God. It means you can't fully understand God. A human being in his limited intellect cannot fully comprehend God. It's called seeing because that's the most clarity that we could relate to. The same way we can't understand God, we can't understand His knowledge. That is what the Navi tells us. God's thoughts are not your thoughts, and His ways are not your ways. V'kivan shekenu, since this is so, says the Rambam, ein banu koyach leida heich yada kosh baruch hu kol habruim v'hamaisim. We don't have the ability to understand how Hashem knows about all of creation and all of one's actions. Avol neida b'loisach, we should know without a doubt. Shemaisa adam b'yada adam. One thing we should know is that man's activities and actions are fully within his discretion. Ve'ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu moishchai, God does not draw him in any direction. V'loi goizer alav la'asos kach, He doesn't decree we should do something. Meaning, one time I had someone in the Shiur, and I asked the question, does man have free choice? And they said, no, God makes you do. So he's an apikairos. Now he happened to have been a frum yid, a shomer Shabbos, his whole life, and the man was in his 80s, but he never learned that there's a concept of free choice. God not only does not make a person do anything, He does not draw you, and He does not inspire you. Contrary to what people think, it is up to you. Don't blame your actions on anybody other than yourself. You say, really? Yeah. Now, so Rambam says, this is not just a matter of tradition. This is not just the Messiah on Klal Yisrael. Ella berayos beruros medivrei hachachma. There are logical proofs to this. Rambam says, "Neizet nemar benavua shedanin as adam al masav kafi masav im tov imra." That's why a person is judged based on his actions, whether they're good or not. This is the fundamental principle of Torah. That is, every man has free choice. You see a guy, he has bad circumstances. No, he chose bad. That's called free choice. That's the principle of the Rambam. This is what we believe it. This is one of the Ikarei Hamunah. In fact, the Rambam says, this is the Ikar HaEmunah. Otherwise, there's no reward and punishment. Whatever you do, don't blame on anyone else. You have only yourself to blame or give credit.
Don't we often ask Hashem to help us?
That's your personal decision. If you want to ask God to help you, then you've decided to choose a certain path. But whatever you do in life, that's up to you.
It's interesting because the pasuk in Bo is actually a warning that you're going to sin. It's not as predicting it. It's giving you a heads up that you have a choice.
The pasuk in Bo is just saying you should know that one day you will have to redeem your firstborn.
Right, but you could take that as a warning that he's giving you a heads up that you're going to have this problem, and maybe you say, in other words, don't is this a contradiction to free choice? Well, we just said that a person has free choice despite the fact that God knows what you're going to choose. So at first glance, it would not seem that this pasuk in Parshas Bo is a contradiction to free choice, because God's just saying, by the way, you have free choice. I'm just giving you a little heads up that I happen to know that you're going to be a complete failure. But there's a deeper problem, though, because as the Chidah is about to enunciate, even though God's knowledge is not a contradiction to free choice, but if He says it, the statement is a contradiction to free choice. And God will never state beforehand that you will sin, because that type of statement will interfere with your free choice. So how do we explain these psukim then in Parshas Bo that God is saying you will redeem your firstborn? Well, wait a second, maybe I won't sin. God, I know you know, but you don't say. And the Chidah says like this. He says, and this is the crux of today's shir, hopefully we'll get to the last thing, and that is the Chidah says that even though God knows, He'll never say it. Because, and this is the principle of the Alshich. The Alshich enunciates in at least 3 places on the sheets today that even God's knowledge is not a contradiction to free choice, but His statement would interfere with free choice. And the Chidah says, "D'chol asher yidaber Hashem muchrach." Whatever God speaks is perforce. Ki diburoi maseh. God's word is an action. Ach b'machshava, but in God's thought, ratzahu yisbarach. That is God's will. The hamachshava loy tichrois. God's thoughts will not force you. V'tishar habechira, free choice remains. V'imkein. So the Chidah is now enunciating this principle that free choice is possible even with God's foreknowledge. It's not possible if God spoke. I'll give you an example, by the way, of where the Alshich enunciates this principle. So the Alshich in Chayesara, Vayan Lavan uVesuel Vayomru Me Hashem Yatsa Hadavar Lainuchal Daber Elecha Ra Oitoiv. The Alshich interprets this pasuk based on the principle of free choice, and that is the Alshich lets us know that as long as something is only in the realm of God's thought, it will not interfere with our bechira. But once God says something, that will interfere and influence our bechira, and therefore, Lavan and Besuel say the following to Eliezer. He says, "Kol oid shahadavar lo yatsa mipiv yisparach ki yimach shava bavad." Then everything is hunky dory. Uvezeh yoimru halo yamarta shetasyachis elenu lechesed ve'emes in noide bezivug. Therefore, you want us to agree to the zivug because you think this is only God's plan. Ach loichenu. If it was only in God's mind, then we would still have free choice. But me Hashem yatsa hadavar. God already said, Arbaim yoim koidem yitziras havlad bas ploini leploini. God already said she's going to marry him. If God said it, then whether we assist it or whether we interfere with it, there's nothing we could do. That's why, sometimes a person sort of, and now this is very difficult to understand. What Lavan and Besuel are saying is that God already declared that Rivka would marry Yitzchak. Like we say on the pasuk, Hine Yolda Milka. Milka had a child. The end of Parshas Vayera. That after the Akedah, Avram was thinking, Oy vey, I really should have married up my son, because had I killed him, he wouldn't have had any progeny. And Hashem said, don't worry, his zivug was born. Hine Yolda Milka uVesuel Yalas Rivka. So Lavan and Besuel are saying, since God already said that Yitzchak is going to marry Rivka, whether we help you out or whether we interfere, he's marrying Rivka because our free choice has already been determined. Now this would explain many things when it comes to Shidduchim, because that means if God already declared 40 days Kodim Yitziras Havlad, that who's going to marry who, that would explain that no matter how much anybody tries to interfere with Shidduchim, they'd happen anyway. On the other hand, sometimes no matter how hard a person tries with Shidduchim, sometimes they don't work. Why is that? Because this is not a matter of free choice. This is already not just God's plan, but God had already declared Blas Pliny Lepliny. But that would be very difficult to understand. Does that mean a person doesn't have free choice when it comes to getting married? Isn't it one of the mitzvahs? So is that a mitzvah that you don't have free choice about? In any event, Rabbi said the principle of the Alshich is speech of God will interfere with free choice. Thoughts of God and knowledge of God does not interfere with free choice. Or, for example, the Alshich in Mahaloischa says, when it comes to the man, look at number 10, the Alshich says, Ata tira hayikrucha devari. Why does it say yikrucha, lashon mikra? The Alshich says, Ulahira she'en das elyon machrachas amar lashon mikra. V'alpi darkoi, based on our principle, what does it mean hayikrucha devari? Well, says the Alshich, I've already established that there's a major fundamental difference between machshava and dibor. Because free choice is possible when you're dealing with thought, but not if God is going to say so. Like the Gemara says in Nida, when the angel that's appointed on conception, his name is Lila, he takes the drop and he places it before God, and God says, this drop is going to be strong or weak, wise or foolish, wealthy or poor. God does not say Rasha or Tzaddik. Now listen carefully. It doesn't say he doesn't know if it's going to be a Rasha or Tzaddik. Yeah, God knows if it's going to be a Rasha. But he won't say it. Why? Because speech contradicts free choice and interferes with free choice. Knowledge does not. So therefore Hashem says to Klal Yisrael, Hayikrucha devari. Let's see if my word takes place. Once I say something, it has to take place. One more example, Rabbi Isai. The Alshich on Tehillim in Parak Nun Aleph Pasuk Vav also establishes this principle that there's a difference between Yediyah and Dibur, that what emanates from God's mouth will interfere with one's free choice as opposed to what he knows. So in Parak Nun Aleph of Tehillim, it says like this: Hinei no Hashem al tashis alai chatas ki l'chol avadcha chatasi v'loi loi. Meaning, the Alshich says this is going on Uriah. Uriah wrote a get for his wife. And so let's read this inside. He says, V'nava yela inyan on the fourth line in number 12. Let's come to the topic. Amar, Hinei na Hashem al tashes alai chatas loya b'chinas Uriah. Not for what I did with Uriah, shalakachti es ishta, that I took his wife, loya nagea elecha al dvar ishes Uriah, and not God, David says, in any way if this was relevant to you, Hashem, because al dvar ishes Uriah ein boy davar. I sinned against you, but not against him. Why not against Uriah? He wrote a document of divorce for his wife, and I didn't sin against you. I already told you, you should equate me with the avos. And you said, I didn't test you like them, because yadata she'echta. Because you knew I would sin. If it would only be in your mind's eye, I didn't have to do it. Listen to how the Alshich is learning this pasuk. The Alshich is saying that David asked Ribbon Shalom. David says, Ribbon Shalom, make me like one of the avos. Hashem said, I can, because I know you're going to sin. David said, why'd you say that? If you would just know that I would sin, maybe I wouldn't sin. But now that you said I'm going to sin, so now it's no sweat off my back. I'm allowed to sin, because you forced me to sin. Because you saying that you knew that I was going to sin made it that I no longer had free choice, so now you can't punish me. So David, so to speak, he figured out the system, and he said, God, once you told me that I can't be like others because you know I'm going to sin, then I'm allowed to sin because I don't have free choice.
No, I'm allowed to. I have to.
Yes.
Anyway, that's a pretty interesting explanation of the Alshich. Be it as it may, let's go back to the Chidah. So now here's $1 million question. If God says, V'chol banecha tifteh, you will redeem the firstborn, isn't God saying that they are going to sin? So the Chidah says, V'mkein harei amar v'chol b'char adam b'vanecha tifteh v'zehu la'achar shi'asa egel sheb'ma'amora yuchruchu la'asisa egel. So now God's saying you'll have to redeem your firstborn. That means He's saying you're going to make an egel. Says the Alshich, no, God never said you're going to make the egel. He just said you're going to have to redeem your firstborn. But that is implicit that they're going to make the egel. That's not called speech. That's still in the realm of thought. Speech is when God says, you will sin. But if God just says, you will redeem your firstborn, oh, but why will I have to redeem my firstborn? It must be? Yeah, that's a must be. That's still in the mind. God, that's still called God's foreknowledge, which is not a contradiction to free will.
So this was written in the Torah before it all happened. But that's not the same as speech.
That's not the same as speech. It's only speech when it says black and white, you will sin. But if God just gives a commandment, which is predicated on an event, which implicit is that you'll have to sin, they still have free choice. Says the Chidah, it doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to make an egel. Very interesting. Okay, let me conclude with the way the Hafla, the Panim Yafais, learns this whole topic. Okay, Rabbi say halt cup over here. The Hafla is certainly bothered by the question of the Rishonim. And again, what's the question on the Rishonim? The question on the Rishonim is, why is there a mitzvah to redeem the firstborn, but right now they're still doing the Avodah, and the Chedo Egel didn't happen? That's question number one. And he obviously feels that it's doichek to say that the mitzvah is given for the future. Because that brings us into the question, does that mean God is predicting or making that they have to sin? Another question he's bothered by is, let me tell you something. There's a part of the Torah which is a very forgotten part. And it's like this. I have a question for you. Before the Torah was given, before the Cheder Egel, who did the Avodah? The B'chairim. That means they were holy. How do you become holy? If you're born first. So the B'chairim lost it. Why? Because they sinned with the Egel. Okay, so let them lose it. But what about B'chairim that were born after the Cheder Egel? What did they do wrong? Why can't they do the Avodah? You ever think about that? Or you're just too busy? Or there's just too many things going on to think about that? Too many phone calls and texts and other nonsense. But did you ever think, okay, the B'chairim lost the Avodah, so let those Chevra lose the Avodah. Here you have a nice kid. He was the firstborn after the Cheder Egel. What did he do that he lost the Avodah? It's Kedushas Haguf. Why would he lose the Avodah? The Hafla says something wondrous, so please help me out. Let's read it in the final Maramakim number 14. Ela deha kasha leituva. Based on what the Gemara in Zvachim says, the avodah hoisa b'bechayros, ela shenifsalu, from the time they made the egel. Now, when the bechayros became disqualified, who got their kedusha? But how many bechayrim were there? 22,273. How many Levium were there? 22. Any Levium here today? You're still a Levi. What do you know?
Still one. And I'm also a Bechar.
He's a Bechar and a Levi. Wow. Double Kedusha.
So what from your left?
There were 22,000 Levium, right? And there are 22,273 Becharim. So they made a swap. The question is, you have 273 Becharim who they have nothing to swap on. So they redeemed themselves. Each one took 5 coins and they were redeemed on the money. So the Hafla asks like this. After the Cheder Egel and the 22,000 Levium were swapped with the 22,000 B'chairim, and the 273 extra ones had to be redeemed, that implies that before the Cheder Egel, they didn't need to be redeemed. So ask the Hafla, so when the world is a pasuk, V'char b'char adam mevanecha tifta. What do you need it for? They didn't become disqualified. So the Hafla says an incredible thing. The Hafla says that before the Cheder Egel, there was no such thing as all the firstborns who were born were a Bechar. It's whatever Becharim that were alive at the time of Makas Bechairos, they were Bechar, and it was passed down to their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Because after all, what sanctified them? The fact that God saved them. It has nothing to... What about if a guy was born the next day? He's also Bechar. Why is he a Bechar? It's they were Becharim, and whoever was born from them were Becharim. And whoever was born later, firstborn, were not Becharim.
So being a Bechor is like a tribe. It's not
Exactly.
the firstborn of the Bechorim, all the children of the Bechorim.
Right. Kol, he says, V'nira da oisan Bechar shukdushu v'tzayim k'mashukaz of kalishli kabachar heim niskachu la'avodah v'kedushas kaihanim. They were like Adam Kedachsiv v'gama kaihanim v'yigoshim Hashem. Rashi says, we're in Parak Yotes Pasuk Chaf Beis. You have a Chumash here? Parak Yotes Pasuk Chaf Beis. V'gam, where does it say that? Who remembers? Parshas Yisra, Yotes Chaf Beis, v'gam kaihanim v'yigoshim Hashem yiskadash. What do you mean kaihanim? There are no kaihanim yet. It means the Bechairim and the descendants of the original Bechairim. And therefore all their descendants were holy, even if they were not Bechairim. Just like the Levium, your kids are Levium, right? It's an amazing coincidence, right? But the answer is it gets passed down. But the Bechairim that were born from the Jews were never Niskadesh for Avodah. But they were Niskadesh for Pidyon. These are the Bechoros of Klal Yisrael that were not Hukdash la'avodah. So it's like this. There were two types of Bechorim. There were the original Bechorim, and they did the avodah and they passed it down to their generations. They didn't need to be redeemed. They never lost anything. They were doing the avodah. You don't redeem something that's Kaddish. But it was the Bechorim that were born later. They had a degree of sanctity, but not for the avodah, just that they are redeemed. Teida, the proof is, if the Bechorim who were born later were sanctified for the avodah, B'chol Bechoros sheyivaldu B'chol Yisrael, Lama yifsu ha-Bechoros sheyivaldu B'shvel avosem shechatu be'egal. If the Bechorim born later did the avodah, then says the Hafla, the Bechorim who were born after the Chedo Egal should still do the avodah. HaKadushas ha-Bechorim he mitzad atzmam. They should still do the avodah. You know why they don't do the avodah? Because even the Bechorim born before the Egal never did the avodah. It was only the descendants of the original Bechorim. And those descendants of the original Bechorim, they are just the beneficiaries of the original Bechorim who lost out, and therefore their descendants lost out. But according to what I wrote, it's only the Bechorim that are around at the time that they left Mitzrayim. Their children were only the beneficiaries, but once their fathers, who were the original sanctified ones, sin, so then the beneficiaries also lost it. Again, the question the Hafla is dealing with is, what about Bechorim that are born after the Chedo Egal? Why can't they do the avodah? The answer is, they can't do the avodah because even Bechorim born before the Chedo Egal can't do the avodah. The only people who do the avodah are the Bechorim who left Mitzrayim, and their descendants who are the beneficiaries. But since the original Bechorim lost it, the beneficiaries lost it. So here's a very interesting question.
Are the descendants of the Bechorim, or only when they have the Chorim of the Bechorim?
No, all the descendants. The same way all the descendants of Kehanim are Kehanim, all the descendants of the original sanctified Bechorim would...
Originally, there wasn't going to be that way, right? There was, when Aaron and his sons were doing the avodah, there was no declaration that...
No, originally they were not going to do the avodah. Aaron and his sons.
But once they were given the avodah, wasn't at some point later on that it was decided that their descendants would also do the avodah? That at the time they did the avodah, it wasn't clear that their descendants would do the avodah.
It was only Aaron and his sons who were born at that time, but the sons who were born later, afterwards, their descendants would not necessarily bring it, only after Ben Parshas Pinchas. Okay, says the Hafla, a very interesting question. According to what we're saying, the 273 Bechorim who were around B'Shas Yetzias Mitzrayim, who couldn't redeem themselves with Levium because there were only 22,000 Levium, and they redeemed themselves with the five Slaim, how did their descendants get redeemed? Why? Because the original 22,000 Bechorim, their Kedusha was put on the Levium. So the Kedusha of the Bechorim and their descendants was put on the Kedusha of the Levium and their descendants. But the 273 who had nothing to be put on, so they did it on money, but that worked for them. How did it work for their descendants?
But the Levium didn't have to be redeemed, right?
No, the descendants of the Bechorim. How did the descendants of the Bechorim get redeemed? The 273, they were redeemed on money. What about their descendants? That those 22,000, that the Levium and their descendants took their place in the place of their descendants. Right, listen to this. The 22,000 Levium, if they had a Bechar, does their Bechar need redemption? The Bechar, right? You're a Levi, you have a Bechar?
No, well, a girl.
A girl. If you had a boy Bechar, would he need to be redeemed?
No.
No, why? Because they were already redeemed. The descendants of Levium who Bechar were already redeemed on the Becharim, Niftu Bezerah HaLevium. What about the descendants of the Bechayrim? Who are Bechayrim? Says the Hafla Ube'ema. He says, let's read this inside. V'nira the Asi Shaper. The Oisan HaChav Beis Elef. Shenichnesu Halaviyim V'zaram L'Dairaisam. The 22,000 Bechayrim that the Leviyim and their descendants took their place. Their Becharis did not have to be redeemed with 5 Slam. Because they were already redeemed with the children of Leviyim. So it's like this. Let me see if I could explain this properly. The Hafla is saying like this. The 273 Bechayrim that were more than Leviyim, who came out of Yitzis Mitzrayim, and they had to redeem themselves of the 5 Slam, how did they redeem their children? Because there were no children of Leviyim to take the place. So the Hafla says like this. The 22,000 Bechayrim that the Leviyim took their place, these 22,000 Bechayrim, they never needed Pidyon. The Leviyim's children took their place. That just like the Kedusha of the other children of those 22,000, in other words, the 22,000 Bechayrim, their descendants should have been sanctified for all time. All their descendants. But they were sort of nifteh with the descendants of Leviyim. Likewise, the Bechayros of the original Bechayros, think of it this way. All the descendants of the original Bechayros were exchanged for the descendants of Leviyim. The 273 extra Bechayros, their Bechayros never needed to be redeemed. Why? Just like the descendants of the original 22,000 Leviyim were never, just like their descendants never needed to be redeemed because they were redeemed on Leviyim, so the Bechayros of the 273 also are good. The haloi b'nei oisan ha-bechayrim shoy b'mitzrayim like Hashem nafkamina ben bechar la'ina bechar shekala banim niskatu v'kedusha saviyim imkain, just like kamay sheshar banim v'hayotzrichim l'pidyon, because they're the descendants of the Leviyim took their place. The Bechayrim didn't need pidyon because the Leviyim took their place. But Hashem's intention was that the Bechayrim that are born from the Zara HaLeviyim, how? Do not need to be born from the Mitzrayim, Kedei Shehem Yu HaPidyon L'chol Zara Haresh Ayin Gimel Bechayrim Chutz Min HaBechayrim Shablahem. V'hatam lozeh, the reason is like this: Kedei shelo yitztarchu b'chol pam levarer mihu zara hachaf beis elef umihu zara haresh ayin gimel el kol habecharim mihu shavim b'chiyuvam b'pidyon heislam. The Hafla says a wondrous thing. The descendants of the 22,000, did they have to redeem their firstborn? The descendants of the 22,000 b'chayrim, no. Did they have to redeem their firstborn? They didn't have to. Why? Why did they have to redeem their firstborn? They didn't have to redeem their firstborn because all of their descendants were nifteh with the descendants of Leviyim. So therefore, the Rebbeinu Shalom made it that the 273 Leviyim, extra Bechayrim, who had firstborn, they also did not have to redeem their firstborn. Otherwise, for all time, we have to be able to distinguish between those Bechayrim born from the 22,000 and those Bechayrim born from the 273. I'll let you think about that. But the bottom line is, the Hafla obviously does not accept the answer of the Rishonim that this mitzvah is given al Shem ha'ased. No, the Hafla learns a wondrous pshat, that there's two types of Bechar. They were the Bechayrim who left Mitzrayim, and they and all their descendants for all time would have done the Avodah if not for the fact that they were exchanged for Leviyim. And then there were Bechayrim who were born later, they needed to be redeemed separately. Okay, Rabbi, I wish everyone a Gittin Shabbos.
That's why we have an opinion of Ben today.
Yes. That's why I have an opinion.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.